can you run when you know? Gotta get down to it. Soldiers are cutting us down. Should have been done long ago. What if you knew her and found her dead on the ground? How could you run when you know? Tin soldiers and Nixon's coming. We're finally on our own. This summer I hear the drumming. Or dead in Ohio. 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 How many more? Or dead in Ohio. Why? Or dead in
Welcome, once again, to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos, and I'm a sociologist at John Jay College here in New York. The radical imagination is being tested in America today as it has not been since the late 1960s. Faced with a president who is a neo-fascist with authoritarian tendencies, while supremacist sympathies, and in basic denial of impending ecological and environmental catastrophes, our work is guided by the sense, as Tom Hayden put it in the Port Huron Statement of 1962, that we may be the last generation in the experiment with living. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, as we've just heard, expressed it poignantly in their song Ohio, an homage to 4 Kent State College students killed by Ohio State troopers on campus during protests against the Vietnam War in 1970. Connections eerily ring true as we face the militarism, spiritual and moral emptiness, structural violence, and racism of our day. Tin soldiers and Nixon coming, we're finally on our own. It has become personal. 2 dear friends and frequent visitors and contributors to the show have in recent weeks come precariously close to losing their lives during their efforts to resist, educate, and protest against the increasing totalitarian violence of our time. The drug researcher and activist Carl Hart had to cut short his recent trip to the Philippines. His life was threatened as he spoke out against the drug war there, through which Philippine President Duterte has killed thousands of his own people and threatens to kill thousands more. Cornel West, who along with 20 or so clergy, praying in a church in Charlottesville during the recent demonstrations there, found themselves surrounded by hundreds of neo-Nazis preparing to attack them during their peaceful demonstration. As Cornell put it, they probably would have been crushed like cockroaches had it not been for groups of Antifa or anti-fascists who came in, put their bodies on the line, defending and protecting the clergy. I'm so happy to welcome to the show today Dan Sherell, the campaign coordinator for New York Renews, an activist coalition group on the cutting edge in the struggle to save the planet as environmental justice advocates. It's a group that understands we're the ones that are going to have to do it and get it right this time. Before we meet Dan, here's a short clip from Joni Mitchell's beautiful and sentimental plea for environmental sanity, her iconic 1970s song, Big Yellow Taxi.
They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. With a pink hotel, a boutique, and a swinging hot spot. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Now they took all the trees, put them in a tree museum. And they charged all the people $1.50 just to see 'em. I said, don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Hey, farmer, farmer, put away that DDT now. Give me spots on my apples, believe me, the birds and the bees. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Late last night, I heard that screen door slam. And a big yellow taxi come and took away my old man. Till it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. Late last night, I heard that screen door slam. And a big yellow tractor come and took away my house. It took away my land. I said, don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They paved paradise, put up a parking lot. They paved paradise,
Put up a parking lot.
Welcome, Dan, to the Radical Imagination. Really glad you're here. I'm really interested. I know our audience is fascinated by your efforts with this organization on the cutting edge, New York Renews. Now, tell us a little about what you're trying to accomplish, a little bit of the history of the, do you call it the environmental movement?
See, I don't think what New York Renews is engaged in, the work that we're engaged in,
Right.
could strictly be confined in the term environmental movement.
Environmental justice, right?
Yeah, environmental justice.
It's getting more to it.
Yeah, I think we see environmental problems, and especially the problem of climate change, which is an existential threat, I think, to civilization as we know it on our planet, as it's not an issue strictly of the environment as like a copse of trees at the edge of your town, or like a whale that you want to save in the ocean and you donate money, you click to donate money to save the whale. Climate change, we think, is a problem that arises from and contributes to vast social, economic, and racial inequities.
Structural violence,
Yes.
as sociologists might call it.
Exactly. And I personally see inequality, vast inequality in wealth and opportunity in this country and all over the world, as a major threat to democratic values, to human freedom. And climate change over the next decade, century, few centuries, could be the wedge that drives the difference between poor people and rich people even further apart.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be the unifying threat and problem that we all work together to solve. And so New York Renews is about cutting across division, cutting across constituency, cutting across even ideology.
Sort of a
form-
fusion
Yeah.
politics,
Yeah.
coalition fusion politics.
Yeah, I think we've learned from the past in seeing that often the environmental movement isn't strong enough always to get the wins that they want to see. The labor movement by itself isn't strong enough to see the wins they want. The racial justice movement, etc. But when we combine forces and we see common cause, we see problems that actually have material threats or benefits to all of our lived experiences, we can form a campaign around them. So this is all very abstract. In concrete terms,
how's it manifesting itself here?
New York Renews is a coalition of, at this point, as of yesterday, 120 organizations across the state of New York, from Buffalo to Syracuse, Albany, Long Island, New York City, the Bronx, where I live, that have combined forces to pass the most aggressive climate change and climate justice legislation in the country, to move our state to being powered by 100% renewable energy by the year 2050.
Now, when you say you passed,
we haven't passed it.
Okay.
We're
that's
working to pass it.
I was in another. I was imagining Nirvana here.
I love the optimism.
That's okay, but we're still trying to pass this.
I think it's a question of when, not if. So I do love the optimism.
Good.
But we are trying to pass in New York landmark climate justice legislation that would move us to 100% renewable energy.
100%.
That would protect workers in the process, make sure there are good jobs and increasing jobs, would give resources to those communities like the Rockaways, for example, where my grandmother lives, who are really on the front lines of climate change, and we saw that with Superstorm Sandy. And finally, I don't think this is such a radical concept, actually, make large corporate polluters pay for the pollution they're putting into our atmosphere and the damage it's doing to our health and the destabilization it's causing to our climate, and use all of that revenue. And it's a lot of cash if you make these people actually.
6.5 billion. I think
Yeah,
that's points out.
Yeah, if we
Something
set,
like that, per year.
we can get into the wonky weeds. If you set a price of, which is actually a pretty modest price of $25 a ton per ton of emissions released that warm our atmosphere.
Pollution. What do you want to call it? Pollution.
We can call it a polluter accountability fee.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah.
Because that's really what we're doing. We're holding them to the same standards of responsibility that all the rest of us are held to, right? If I went to my neighbor's house in the Bronx and dumped trash in her yard, she'd be like, hey, what the heck? You got to clean that up, or at least you have to pay me so I can hire somebody to clean that up.
And the city would give you a ticket far in excess of
Right.
$25. So.
And this is true of corporations as well. I mean, some of the great victories won by the environmental movement were making, corporations can't simply dump their effluent into a river. Or if they do, they have to buy expensive permits and they have to buy, et cetera.
Clean it up.
Yeah. For
Super
the
fun.
largest potential threat of our time, though, climate change, which, if we don't get it under control, has the potential to really destabilize the very basic food and water supplies around the globe, nothing of this sort exists. And so what we're trying to do is, let's hold polluters to the same level of accountability, put a price on the pollution they're putting into our atmosphere, and use that revenue to fund renewable energy projects, to fund a transition for workers who are currently in the oil and gas industry to the renewable industry, and to get rebates to everyday New Yorkers.
Right. And who would be enforcing, investigating this?
Mm-hmm.
Would there be some sort of watchdog
Yeah.
organization?
So, I mean, watchdog's a funny term, right? To some extent, the reason we've accumulated so many organizations in this coalition is not just because we know we'll need a lot of intersectional political power to get it passed, but also because the work of passing it is the first step, right? The real meat is in the work of implementation and of all of us keeping the government on track to do this. But a carbon tax, a polluter accountability fee, whatever you want to call it, that's something that could be pretty easily administered by the Department of Environmental Conservation, NYSERDA, which is sort of the state-level renewable energy department. And they've actually done it in the province of British Columbia in Canada. They've put a price on climate pollution. The usual cast of characters, the oil and gas lobbyists, the businessmen, the conservatives, were trotted out on the media saying, oh, this is going to destroy the provincial economy. We're going to see a massive job loss.
Right.
And instead, they've seen quite the opposite. They've seen a decent reduction in the emissions, not as aggressive as it should be, I think. And that's why we're looking to pass more aggressive legislation. But they've also seen the creation of new jobs in the renewable energy sector. They've seen
So British Columbia has been
consumer
sort
impact.
of this example, this very positive example that
Yeah.
people who are rational about this could relate to this if they were. You know, we have you sent a 2-minute clip on New York Renews. So let's, if we've got time, can we show that right now or in a few minutes? I think it explains.
On shore, winds now at 90 miles
We've
per
got
hour.
buildings with roofs that are either partially torn off.
Here could have an 11 and a half feet of additional water in New York Harbor. We looked it up to see if
I'm not a big believer in man-made climate change. I don't believe it's a devastating impact.
Our plan will end the EPA, which is a wonderful disaster. Sitting in this concealed park. I'll tell you the one thing I know isn't is global warming.
The only way we fight this is by bringing together every community. Paris, the goal was to bring together people from every part of the world. And in New York, we have to do that too. And this is the coalition that is going to accomplish that goal. Upstate and downstate, every community, environmentalists, labor, fighting together for one simple, profound goal.
Climate capitalism now is dictating. They're wanting to buy time.
We want our legislators and the lawmakers in Albany to face the issue so that we can experience the change that we need.
More than the personal level, we need to do at the institutional level. We need to strengthen our climate regulations.
Laws are one, and also jobs, renewable jobs.
Right now, the more people we can get interested and involved, the better.
How can anybody be against that? But there are.
Yeah.
So how are you trying to further this along?
Yeah. So New York Renews, we're built around this big vision, right? That we don't want to live in a state where we have a superstorm Sandy coming through our neighborhoods every 5 to 10 years. We don't want to live in a state where kids in the Bronx, for example, are forced to breathe polluted air and to go to the hospital. Like, there are kids that go to the that are in the hospital 3-4 times a month for asthma attacks. We don't want to live in New York where we have to do that to our children in order to power our transportation sector and power our homes. And we don't want to live in a New York that's increasingly dependent on the corporate fossil fuel industry, but rather a New York where people have control over their own energy. Those energy sources are clean and renewable, so you're not choosing between sickening your kid and turning the light on. And in New York, that's protected from the effects of climate change, which we know have some capacity to get worse, especially if we don't get control of this problem.
So it's very personal.
It's very personal.
It's very concrete, very personal.
Yeah.
You're reaching people. You're the chief coordinator of this. All right. So you're getting out there with this message, which is so incredibly sane and rational, makes sense, and it's so constructive. Where are you at in terms of the proposal now? Where is it going?
So we've got 2 bills.
2 bills, yes. Please
Two
talk
bills
about
that we're trying to pass
into
law through the New York State Legislature.
Community protection?
Yeah, so the first one is called the Climate and Community Protection Act.
Okay.
And what this bill would do was essentially mandate into law that the state has to reach 100% renewable energy by 2050. So right now, the state's got some renewable energy goals that have sort of come out of the governor's mouth, We're not on track to meet those goals for a variety of reasons.
How close? From the governor's mouth.
From the governor's mouth?
Well, you saying he's spouting whatever he's spouting.
You know, I mean, I think
do you think he's open to some of this?
Yeah,
but he's got to be pushed, right?
Yeah, I think the governor. You know, it's hard to know what's in the governor's heart. I think he's absolutely made some good steps in the right direction.
Okay.
But part of the problem with those steps is that they're non-binding. They're not set into law, so that the next administration, for example, if we get an administration that's less friendly to climate policy, and let's remember, we need these policies to last for the next 35 years, right?
Exactly.
We need them to be durable.
Right.
So what our bill would set the goal of 100% renewable energy into law. So no future governor can do what Trump's doing to Obama's executive orders, which are very easy to overturn, right? A law is much harder. And it would also mandate that 40%.
How do you know that they couldn't do that? I mean, you're saying.
Yeah.
I mean, in other words, would there be enough public pressure? I mean, but again, technically, some governor could come in and try to do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think legally, laws are much harder to unravel than like administrative writ.
Got it. Okay.
And I'm not a lawyer, but I think.
Right.
So part of the bill is doing that, just setting into law
these
ambitious goals. But part of it is also making sure the resources are going to the communities that need them. So we propose that 40% of state energy resources should go to the communities who either A, like the Bronx, have faced a disproportionate burden of environmental pollution in the past, and
measured by such indicators as asthma, and
particulate pollution in the atmosphere,
stuff like that,
etc.
Okay, etc.
And the other, and they're often overlapping, is communities that are particularly vulnerable to sea level rise, storm surges, the kind of effects we're going to see from climate change, like the Rockaways.
Other than Wall Street.
Other than Wall Street.
They're ready to create seawalls to heaven for that.
Yeah,
right?
it's funny.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think we really have to worry about Wall Street.
There's
this great picture I remember. I mean, it's kind of a horrifying picture from right after Superstorm Sandy, where all of Lower Manhattan was dark, except for the Goldman Sachs building that had its own generator, which I think is a useful parable for like what happens when climate change gets really bad. Who is sacrificed and who is saved? And I think that parable informs the work we do. So part of it is about the 100%, part of it is about getting resources to the communities that need it most, and part of it would set fair labor standards in place for renewable energy sector jobs that receive any state funding. So
as we transition into that renewable energy.
Exactly. So we're trying to make sure that job sector is not, those are not Burger King jobs, right? Those are good family supporting jobs that lift people into the middle class. I mean,
union jobs, craftspeople, and plumbers, and so on.
I mean, what we're actually talking about here is a New Deal, right? This could potentially be one of the largest and most productive restructurings of our economy of all time, but we have to get it right. And so I think of this first bill, the Climate and Community Protection Act. I used to play soccer, so I think in soccer metaphors a lot. Okay. It sort of sets the end line for where New York has to get to on climate, and then also the sidelines for how we have to get there in a way that supports workers and protects frontline communities. So that's the first bill.
Okay.
The second bill, which is still in development, but we are planning to roll out in about a month, would do what I was describing earlier, which is finally put a price on climate pollution in New York and use that revenue to fund the transition to renewable energy. We know we're going to need a lot of state revenue to take our economy away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy. And there's this huge wad of cash sitting in these oil and gas corporations' pockets that's basically a massive sort of backhanded subsidy, right? We're not making them pay for all the damage that we're taking on, the burden that we're taking on as taxpayers. We take on that.
Is it similar to California's cap and tax?
It is. We think it's a lot more progressive than what California just passed for a few reasons. One, a carbon tax, there's a lot you could say about the cap and trade carbon tax debate. I think they can be both, personally, I think they could both be good policies if they're structured correctly. I think the benefit of a carbon tax is you generate all this revenue And then we're very specific that we want that revenue going back into the renewable energy industry and back into the pockets of workers and New Yorkers.
That's what makes it, if you will, more just,
exactly.
and more progressive.
Exactly.
That's the connection that you're not seeing as much of in California, am I correct?
Yeah.
And that's what you're hoping to do here in New York.
Exactly. And I think New York
right.
and Governor Cuomo has a chance to leapfrog California in terms of climate leadership for the country, which we desperately need in the era of Trump, right? And we can talk about him a little bit more later.
Right.
But we have the opportunity to pass sort of watershed policies here in New York that set the standard, set the high water mark, so that hopefully the next administration we have, a sane administration, a just administration, can take up those, can farm those policies from New York and start to apply them nationally.
So, as far as you can tell, where is Cuomo on all of this now? Are you reaching out to him? What is he saying about all of this? And
good question. So, to some extent, we haven't really begun that public dialogue with Cuomo yet because we are waiting for this year where we think we have a huge political opportunity. So to give the broad strokes, come this fall, we're going to be packaging these two bills together and introducing them as a platform publicly.
To the state legislature?
To just
city councils?
No, to the state legislature.
State legislature, okay.
And we're going to be really pushing for that platform to be passed through the state budget process. Now, it sounds kind of weird, like why the state budget process? Why not just the usual legislative process? The brief on that is that New York has this strange legislative precedent where more and more of the kind of like major hallmark pieces of progressive legislation are getting passed through the budget because of the politics right now in the legislature, with the Senate being controlled by Republicans, are so toxic. So Governor Cuomo, we've seen,
use a term from the environmental movement. Yeah,
exactly.
That's what we hear, right?
Yeah.
And so just clarify just a little more the separation here, the budget process versus it's not. Who do you have to talk to really get push this further?
So, and I think I appreciate the question because I really think this is something that every New Yorker should know, and every New Yorker who cares about what our government is doing at the state level.
I agree.
The budget process works basically at the beginning of the year, in January. Governor Cuomo gives the State of the State address, which basically outlines his major policy priorities for the year, and then the day after or whatever releases what's called his executive budget proposal, which is basically a sort of like more detailed, wonkier version of what he's laid out in the State of the State.
Itemized and so on. Okay.
And so these are his priorities for the year. Not only who gets what, but also like what policies are attached to the budget. I think, again, because of the political dysfunction in the legislature, more and more legislation actually gets passed by being included in the budget bill. So there's a budget bill. The budget bill is by far, every year, it's the most consequential bill that gets passed in New York. So the governor puts forward his draft. Then in the subsequent months, the Assembly, which is controlled by Democrats, and the Senate, which at least for now is controlled by Republicans, each of them put forward their draft. And then come March, you get the famous dynamic. It's called 3 men in a room.
Yeah.
I think it's really not.
If they're not in prison at that time, right? Which politicians are you? Well, okay, didn't mean to be.
No, it's fine.
Sorry,
I mean, it is. I mean, this is not how democracy should work, right? Like the major issues getting hashed out by 3 men, and of course it's 3 men sitting together.
Or beholden to various interests. All right, spell it out. It's getting a little murky here, but all right.
So it's the governor.
Right.
The head of the Assembly, who right now is Carl Heastie, who represents a district in the northeast Bronx.
Okay.
And then the president of the Senate, John Flanagan, who's a Republican, ostensibly a climate denier, has thrown his lot in with the kind of head in the sand Republican mentality.
So that's a goner.
Yeah.
So you got to get 2 votes?
So the conventional wisdom, so it's not really votes. It's really like horse trading inside baseball. I'll give you this if you give me that kind of thing. And we think if we can get the governor really behind this idea and realizing that he has a chance to be the leader for the country on this and maintain the Assembly as allies, and they have been amazing allies on the issue of climate justice, then you can pass pretty ambitious stuff even over the head of the Republicans in the Senate.
So our hope is that Cuomo is enough of a narcissist and his ego. No, okay, I don't want to be silly, because this is serious stuff.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. The fate of the world here rests on
I
this.
know.
It seems like very antiquated, sort of, as you say, horse trading.
Yeah.
But that's the reality. And what about? It seems to me too, the social movement that you're building, that you're coordinating, has got to play a role here. And if you all go up to Albany enough times and make it clear to these politicians that the great masses want this, I mean, does that realistically play a part?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I think in most cases, I mean, you hear about the 3-man-in-a-room system, and it sounds, this is not a system where it's like, come on in, this is your democracy, we work for you. You know, it can be intimidating and disheartening to find out this is how your government works.
Yeah.
It certainly was for me as a young organizer.
Right.
And yet, at the same time, social movements are often the X factor that put the political weight on the scale that allow something to be passed.
That's a great point, yeah.
So what our responsibility is to create an unstoppable momentum across the state that compels Cuomo to take up this issue and run with it and cows the Republican opposition. And so that's what we plan to do.
And the same role, in a sense, could be played writ large with Trump, too. Although, again, you're dealing with a much more ideologically rigid person there. But still, the masses of people, the movement can make a difference.
Exactly.
The sort of pressure.
And, you know,
even there, perhaps, right?
Yes. But I think everyone wants to fight Trump, which is incredibly important. But people also want to feel hopeful, you know? Like, I don't want to spend the next 4 years playing defense. I want to spend the next 4 years playing offense, trying to enact the proactive visions that we have for a more just society that respects all people. Not just fighting against, I mean, this is important too, but not simply fighting against Trump's ignorant fascism. And I think that's what people around the state are finding an opportunity to do through New York Renews, is see levers of power at the state level that they can really have a handle on and who are accountable to them as constituents and push forward a positive vision of the New York we want to live in.
That's so important, because you're talking about jobs and better health.
Yep.
And lifting people out of poverty and making people feel there's a purpose and there's hope in the world. People are so cynical.
Yeah.
They're not stupid. They look around and see what's happening to the environment. It's hot. We're dealing with all kinds of disasters around the world. And as you say, disproportionately falling on the great masses of poor people and disenfranchised. So you're on to something I think that's incredibly important. So there's a timeline here: the fall, March, and if all goes well, by this time next year, what? You'll come on the show again, and we'll be talking.
Yeah, we'll be celebrating.
And you're going to be putting. You've got the polluter, whatever we want to call it, tax in line, and the money's coming in, and you're showing the positive part of all of this by the job creation, as I say, and the lessening of health issues and so on.
Yeah.
So that's the larger.
Yeah, I mean the general strategy
vision
we have for the next few months. I mean, we're going to be rolling out this platform probably around late September, with all the details, etc. And we're going to draw this as a line or a litmus test going into an election year in 2018. This is what you need to support, and this is what you need to pass if you're going to claim yourself to be a climate champion, right? Because, you know, we were talking earlier, it's really important with the issue of climate change to distinguish between what is merely good, and the governor has done some good things on climate. He banned fracking, he's passed a clean energy standard, which we're currently not on target to hit, but, you know, he put some muscle behind the renewable energy economy. But we really have to be vigilant to distinguish between what is good and what is actually adequate to the scale of the problem. Because it's a massive problem, and it's easy to score political points off of, but we actually need to save ourselves, you know? Like, it's not
just respond to sort of important isolated events, but as you say, have this overall vision and philosophy that gets concretized.
And urgency, right?
Urgency,
like if
absolutely,
if it takes us another century to move our economy to renewable energy, that's too long. Many people are going to suffer if we take that long. So there's a real urgency to move as quickly as we can. So we are going to be calling on the governor publicly to include this in the in his State of the State, to really put his vision and his muscle behind this idea, and make New York the first state in the country to put a price on carbon pollution and use that money to fund the renewable energy revolution. It's a visionary idea. There are a lot of people across the state, from the labor unions in our coalition to the super grassroots racial and social economic justice organizations in communities from Buffalo to Brownsville. There are a lot of people that have identified their self-interest in these bills and are ready to get behind him and praise him for doing this. But we need him to show the political courage to actually be the visionary for the country. And I think he can do it.
The political courage, the moral integrity. And again, not just about your political career. And just getting elected and reelected. And isn't that a big part of the problem? The inability to get things done is so rooted in our political system, which is rooted in people who are afraid to do what's right. I mean, we're being pedantic about it. I mean, this is not nuclear physics here. I mean, we see it every day. We know who's suffering. And, you know, I'm reminded of the cigarette executives who themselves would be dying of lung cancer and still insisting that smoking cigarettes was fine. I mean,
exactly.
So what you're a philosophy major, okay? We were talking before the show, from a great university, Brown University. So what's your insight philosophically about human nature? Or
I feel like this is more of a psychological question.
No, well,
and I don't, this is classic armchair diagnosis.
Of course.
I think for me, climate change is a really, really hard problem to think about and to wrap your head around. There's a philosopher, actually, to tie it back there, who refers to climate change, this is a strange academic word, as what he calls a hyper-object. And hyper-objects are objects that are so distributed in time and space that they elude specification, and it's hard to put your finger on them.
Can't wrap your head around
exactly.
it.
So climate change is one of them.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people, including myself, feel two things when they think about climate change. One is that it's overwhelming. We're talking about the fate of the planet. Like, I care about the planet, but what does that really mean in terms of my day-to-day life, interacting with my neighbors, walking my dog, go to the grocery store? Like, my day-to-day life can't accommodate that kind of big problem. And the other thing you feel, or at least I feel, is grief. You know, I have moments of lucidity. I mean, I put my head down and organize, but I have grief for the future and for the problems that my generation has inherited. Because I could be alive to see the world go to a pretty scary place, climatologically. A degree of warming that we haven't seen in the history of human civilization could happen in my lifetime, and the consequences of that are dire. And so I think a lot of people somewhere inside of themselves feel that, and I think more and more people are talking about it openly and being vulnerable about it. You know, there are a lot of people in my generation, I think people would be surprised, that are taking the issue of climate change into account when they consider starting a family and having children.
But yet your generation is so very active too. This seems to be the one issue that your generation is connecting to, Ron, right?
Yeah, I mean,
but your point is so well taken.
Yeah,
sort of a traumatized melancholy, or God, what can we do?
And so how do you overcome that? Yeah. And so
cynicism, if you
exactly. So for me to overcome that, you need to do two things, and I try to do these two things as an organizer. One, show people that actually they are not powerless, and they don't have to let this steamroll them, but they have real power to change the course of the ship right now. They really do. The next 1 or 2 decades are going to be critical. And young people, organizing veterans, whoever it is, we have power to actually shift these debates. But secondly, climate change in a way presents us with an incredible, unprecedented opportunity. I like to think about this thought experiment, or like we've seen this story a lot in sci-fi. You know, the alien civilization comes to Earth to destroy us, and like suddenly everyone like puts their guns aside, and like finally there's like a unifying force. There's a unifying problem.
There's so many of these, God, these aliens and monsters and everybody coming from over, you know, other worlds to destroy us. I mean, that's part of what you're talking about here, right?
Yeah,
Seems like that's about all we are fed, this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Vampires and aliens and I don't know, cyber devils, I don't know.
I mean, there's a reason why this is science fiction.
Right.
But I think there's an analogy to climate change there. Let's
Right.
imagine an alien civilization came to our planet, and instead of pointing a laser at our Earth and saying we're going to blast you apart, they instead put a hose and said we're going to pump this over the course of a century, we're going to pump this gas into your atmosphere that makes your planet unbearably and inhospitably hot. In the science fiction version of that movie, everyone rallies together to solve that problem because it's a problem that affects all of us. What makes climate change complicated is that our economy, our civilization, is that external force pumping this gas into our atmosphere. And so there's a disjuncture, like how do we solve this when the problem is us? But I think there's a tremendous opportunity in climate change to see a problem that truly does affect all of us. And there are actually very few problems like that, but it really does, no matter what country you live in, no matter your lot in life, you are going to feel the effects of climate change, and they could be really bad. And so I think, and I hope, that over the next few decades, this problem is going to serve as a lightning rod of unity, you know? I mean, the other case is possible as well. You know, climate change could get worse, and we could descend into this sort of tribalistic division we're seeing in American politics right now.
Right.
I am optimistic that the opposite will happen. This will be a rallying force to really make a better society.
But it could go either way.
It could go either way.
Our variations. But as you point out, I think that is so crucial. The urgency. Mother Earth is not playing around with us.
Yeah.
Right? Well, as you point out, and the opening, I use that, the term there with saving the planet.
Yeah.
But you had an excellent point before the show too. We talked. The planet will probably be around. It's us who won't be.
That's why I'm
right.
That's why I kind of push back against this concept of environmentalism.
Right.
Because
too narrow.
It separates the environment from us. Right. The environment is the whales. We need to protect them by donating money, whatever we need to do. What we need to realize is that, as you say, the planet's going to be fine. The fight against climate change is really a fight for our own lives and a fight to maintain this sort of stable civilization with the chance of opportunity and justice that we've become accustomed to.
And the only way that we're really going to be able to save our lives is to care for the environment.
Which is us.
Which is us, but the water and the air and
the
foliage and so on.
And
right, so we are tied in.
Yeah, we're extremely tied in, and
obviously.
so you know we have the opportunity, right, to tackle this challenge, and in tackling this challenge, actually gain a huge amount of benefit from it. Tens of thousands of new jobs, healthier communities, safe communities, an economic resurgence, the likes of which we haven't seen from the New Deals.
Right.
All of these is ready to be reaped, but we have to find the unity and the common cause to actually gather around solving this problem as aggressively, as urgently as we need to, and that's sort of what the coalition building project of New York Renews is all about.
Again, that's terrific. And again, we were talking a little about this before the show too. You're getting support from, those who are interested in more identity politics, Black Lives Matter, gay rights, and so on, criminal justice issue people. Are you getting support there? Are they making the connections too? Because I think that's crucial. The more of the organizations that can come on board, the poor, We mentioned Reverend Barber's Poor People's Campaign, which I hope, if you haven't already, we hook up with.
Yeah.
And we'll give you information about it, because we had Nick Brana here a few weeks ago, because it is tied in, Poor People's Campaign, for environmental justice. I mean,
yeah, I mean, there are a number of organizations in New York Renews that see the problem of climate change as explicitly a problem of structural violence against people of color.
Okay.
Because when you think about the impacts that climate change has worldwide, again, the people in the tower at Goldman Sachs are going to be fine, but a lot of the people that are most at risk are first in the public housing in the Rockaways, mostly low-income people of color, but internationally, they're in Bangladesh, they're in sub-Saharan Africa, they're in Indonesia, all of these countries and regions that are extremely vulnerable to increasing drought, increasing flooding, worse superstorms, etc. And it's kind of like a continuation of patterns of colonialism that we've seen for centuries, right? Yeah. These multinational oil and gas corporations like ExxonMobil, they're kind of like the Dutch East India Company of our day, right?
Controlling the resources of the poor countries and so on.
Not only controlling the resources, extracting value and then putting those same countries and those same lives at grave existential risk.
Right. And the militaristic forces behind that, the wars that are being fought for those natural resources. And that's why I want to open up the show with the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young song. And make, because what the military too is controlling people, trying to dominate, trying to exploit. And what we've got to realize is that we can't do that with people, we can't do that with the environment. So there's a connection there.
Yeah, we talk a lot about an economy that extracts labor from workers is the same economy that's going to extract oil and gas and natural resources from the ground, rather than what we might call a regenerative economy that empowers workers through their work and also empowering society through wind, through solar, etc., actually makes our environment cleaner and more hospitable. So
that's a great way of putting it. So you don't get into some sort of esoteric, or do you, esoteric debate about, smashing capitalism and all that, right? You use these different terms.
Yeah. I mean,
which I think is more helpful, right?
Yeah, capitalism. I have my own major critiques of capitalism.
Absolutely.
It's another hyper object, right? You can't put your finger on it. So where's the toehold? Where's the way in? And I think when we talk about policies that New York Renews is pursuing, we can talk about capitalism, but what we're really talking about is new jobs, is healthier children, and is communities that don't have to get devastated by a flood every 5 years. Right?
Regenerative.
Yes.
And to use some of the spiritual terms, tikkun, alone, healing, spiritual transformation.
Yeah.
And that's also tied in a lot with what we've been trying to do in this show here over the past couple of years.
Yeah.
Listen, Dan, we only have a minute or so left. Tell the audience how they get in touch with you, how they can further this struggle, this process, how to reach you, and so on.
Absolutely. So I'm asking everyone who's watching this show, if you want to fight for climate justice and an unprecedented price on climate polluters in New York, you can simply go to New York Renews, that is NYRenews, RENEWS.org, O-R-G. Sign up for our mailing list, and we'll make sure that as we launch this in the fall and are putting pressure on our leaders to step up and fight against Trump and fight for climate justice, that you can see us in the streets, organize with us in your neighborhoods, and help us win this, what would be a real historic victory.
Terrific. Dan, thank you so very, very much. You've really enlightened me. I know the audience has really appreciated what you brought to us here, and it's been really enlightening, and we just wish you the best. Thank you again so much,
thanks so much for having me.
All right.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
Best. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you all. This is Jim Vrettos, your host for The Radical Imagination. We'll see you next week.
For the Public Health Service to take a closer look at this?
Yes, and I know that they already are. I think particularly, of course, it's Ms. Carson's book, but they are. examining the matter.
If you think of her as a revolutionary, it's rather startling. But in the sense of a change in our thought, I think she was revolutionary.
You know, Rachel was my mother too, after my mother died.
The real threat, then, to the survival of man is not chemical, but biological, in the shape of hordes of insects.
All the pieces of an extremely complex jigsaw puzzle are at last falling into place. It is now possible to build up a really damning case.
Silent Spring are gross distortions of the actual facts, completely unsupported by scientific experimental evidence and general practical experience in the field.
Particularly, of course, Ms. Carson's brought, but they are examining the matter.
No one in either county farm office who was talked to today had read the book, but all disapproved of it heartily.
Ms. Carson maintains that the balance of nature is a major force in the survival of man, whereas the modern chemist, the modern biologist, the modern scientist believes that man is steadily controlling nature.
Now, to these people, apparently the balance of nature was something that was repealed as soon as man came on the scene. Well, you might just as well assume that you could repeal the law of gravity. The balance of nature is built of a series of interrelationships between living things and between living things and their environment.